Hi, I'm Terry Kolath. I'm talking about a lunch and learn in the Academy. And this time, Professor Adrienne Kerr is going to tell us the story of Thanksgiving as we enjoy some tasty holiday food. Thanks for joining me, Professor Kerr.
It's a pleasure as always, Terry. Thank you.
Well, I love that we started these lunch and learns and we can kind of enjoy a lunch that's sort of theme-oriented. Well, you tell us the history of something. And Thanksgiving, one would think that we know all about it, do we?
We know a lot about it, but there's still debate as to which was the first Thanksgiving and what exactly went on, who attended. And so we have really only one serious source of material, which is from the Pilgrims and the gentleman who spent his whole life building up Plymouth, which then became part of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. But he wrote every week something of importance that occurred, and it's from that source, which covers 25 years or more, that we go to identify when was the first. There's some debate as to whether other colonies had Thanksgiving. And if you go back, way back in time, Thanksgiving is in fact an Old English Saxon period celebration. And if you think about how people lived so precariously in the Dark Ages, they depended entirely on gathering in the food from the fields, storing it safely to keep them going through the winter and the spring so that they can replant so they could have a summer and another harvest. And this isn't just a matter of going to Publix and stocking up because we're out of bread. This is life and death. And in fact, many early colonial settlements almost perished because they had to go through a bitter winter with inadequate stock and relied on imports from Britain at the time. So this was serious. And in fact, the people of England were so grateful to God that they had provided the harvest and had enough food now to carry them through to the next year that they celebrated. And to this day, in the late summer, early fall in England, there are harvest Sundays. I remember growing up in England that we'd go along on certain days and have all these foods, fruits and cereals all laid out, and it was, the whole theme was Thanksgiving. So it goes back probably 1,000 years before, well, 800 years before the United States. So now we wind forward that the Brits had come across to set up new colonies, and despite what people believe, they didn't come for religious freedom. They came for opportunistic reasons. Only very few came for religious freedom because many of them had religious freedom. Even the Pilgrims had religious freedom in Holland, but they wanted to grow up in an English environment, so they came to Plymouth. Relationships with local people are critical in that the natives that they met were really deciding whether they were going to survive or not. In their favor, rather sadly, the early explorers had called in all along the coast of northern United States colonies and had brought with them smallpox. So something like 2/3 of the population of Northeast Americas had died of smallpox. So the numbers of native Indians were small, and there was a balance between the newcomers and the rather reduced population, and they decided to be friends. Not always, but in Virginia, less good friends, but in the Plymouth area, they decided to share the bounty of the taking in the food from the fields with their neighbors, who are the Indians. And then if you look at the narrative, a number of them, including the chief, were invited to join with them in a simple table with a very few settlers and the Indians, and they shared food together. And it even describes the ladies did all the preparation as ever. And then it talks about what was eaten, and I'm going to keep this until we have the talk, but there's one item on most of our Thanksgiving tables today which is never mentioned in the first documented Thanksgiving meal, and I keep that a secret. how did it become a national holiday, you ask? And it was many, many years later that this concept of Thanksgiving for bringing in the harvest was brought into high focus by the state governments and then the national government. And then, of course, it starts to move around. If we're going to have a national holiday based on those early days, when should it be? And it's moved around a little bit in time, but it's now centered on the last Thursday of November, and that's only been the last 50 or 60 years.
Interesting, interesting. And it's going to be delicious.
It's going to be a delicious meal.
And fun as always.
Thank you.
Please join us. If you can get a ticket, you will meet us at Academy Lunch and Learn, the story of Thanksgiving. If the class is already full, fear not, we'll have more.